Flem stepped in to separate the two of them. "This is as far as it goes, your majesty." She held back her anger, showing only caution. She is still a prisoner of the spirit tribe. No matter how you put it, it's better if you keep your distance from her. The Demon King replied indifferently, "You don't need to worry. This isn't a big deal for me." Flem interrupted, her voice loud and clear. "Your majesty, there are still many things on the territory that require your personal attention. Please leave immediately to take care of your duties." Flem was angry, and even he could sense the tension. All right. She carefully adjusted her glasses. Good. She stood in front of the spirit princess. "Your majesty, let me handle things here for now." The Demon King was about to say something, but Flem immediately stopped him. "Is there something else?" "Your majesty, just a small matter." The Demon King shuddered. Was Flem's reaction a bit too much? He explained his reasons to her, saying that he'd like to invite the spirit guest to dinner in the hall. "I want her to experience the hospitality of our demon army." Flem bowed to the Demon King. "It was just a dinner, nothing to worry about." "Your decision certainly does honor the position of your majesty." Then it's settled. Ha ha ha. Once the business was done, he quickly made his exit, leaving the two behind. Flem bowed respectfully as he left. "Then I'll take my leave." Herver, watching from behind, couldn't help but glance at her. Earlier, his attention had been on the Demon King, barely noticing her full, alluring lips. He shifted his gaze to Flem's chest, which demanded a hot, curvaceous figure. Then his eyes moved to her hips. Her tanned, tempting skin stood out beautifully. A strange feeling stirred within her. The shameless servant of the Demon King has abandoned the gods and fallen into depravity. Why is it that even when she insults me, I feel a strange sense of excitement? Herver seems to be aroused, her hands involuntarily moving in suggestive ways. Flem sneered, "Oh, every insult you throw at me is nothing more than the highest praise for me." Flem turned around. "I don't know what you're planning with your spirit-like actions, but using such shameless methods to approach the Emperor's palace is unforgivable." However, Flem pointed at Herver threateningly. "If I catch you even thinking of anything inappropriate toward His Majesty, I will make you regret ever being born into this world." Herver lowered her head. "You forced this tough approach on me yourself." Flem seriously picked up a rope, of course, for the Demon King's army. "No one is better at interrogation than me." Herver happily grabbed her hand. "Well, that's great. Show me what you've got then." Flem didn't expect her to react like this. "I haven't made myself clear, or maybe I'm misreading the situation. But this person, she almost seemed eager." Flem shook Herver off. "I'm not in the mood today. There's still work to be done for His Majesty, and I have to go assist him." She walked away, leaving Herver disappointed. "Someone will take you to your new room soon. Be on your best behavior until then." Watching Flem's back, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unwillingness. Was it really enough to just walk away like this? Forget it. There's no rush. But in her heart, she thought if she did anything to provoke that demon lord, would this dark elf really turn violent against her? Just thinking about it made her face flush with embarrassment. Herver licked her finger, her legs pressed tightly together. As expected of a lecherous, depraved dark elf, she was alone, enjoying her own indulgence. That was really too brazen. In her subconscious, dark elves were all beings who had fallen from grace. They had abandoned their once pure faith in the elven gods, which was why they had become like this now. She held a small leaf in her hand. "As a princess of the elves, I have a duty. I need the power to redeem these fallen dark elves, to help them reconnect with the true essence of elven spirit. Every insult like this, I will remember it." Herver gently lifted the fabric covering her thigh with one arm while holding the leaf in the other. She knelt down, placing a leaf on her thigh. "I will personally lead you back from this wrong path." The dark elf Herver began to draw strange symbols on her thigh. Flem suddenly tensed, feeling that something was off. She pushed her glasses up, trying to shake off the feeling, but why did it seem like someone was watching her? At the Demon Lord's castle, Queen Herver was warmly welcomed by Demon Lord Lucifer Morla. "Queen Herver, this meal is to welcome you to the Demon Lord's army. Please make yourself at home." Flem glanced at her, visibly irritated, as he angrily slammed his fork down onto the plate. "Your Highness, the enemy is still the enemy. There's no need for such formal hospitality, especially going so far as to prepare food from the elf tribe." Herver tucked her hair behind her ear and pretended to be shy before picking up her fork to take a bite of food. She even made a point to sarcastically mock Flem. "Are you saying that people like me, like you, should be locked up? Drinking just rice water every day, only pigs deserve that, right?" With that, she brought the food to her mouth but didn't eat it. Instead, she playfully licked it, her movements intentionally teasing. Flem's anger flared at the sight. She huffed and turned her head away, clearly trying to provoke him. Sitting across from her, he shrugged and smiled, trying to hide his irritation. "There's no need to panic. The hospitality of our Demon King's army is far from what you're implying." He then gestured to the plate of vegetables on the table, picking up a piece. "Preparing these isn't difficult. They're all just vegetables, but they don't taste bad at all. Morla took a bite of her food, savoring it with a bright smile. Before she could finish her smile, Flem's expression darkened, his brows furrowing in dissatisfaction. He couldn't help but wish more than ever that she would settle down and behave. He chewed his food in silence, his body tense as though filled with frustration. Something didn't feel right. Under the table, Herver's leg was brushing against his, intentionally teasing him. She kept her eyes on the person in front of her, still holding a fork in one hand, licking food off of it while glancing at him. He felt uneasy and irritated. What was she up to now? But knowing her personality, if he called her out on it, she'd probably pull some dirty trick. He decided to just put up with it for now. With that thought, he tried to ignore her misbehaving legs under the table and refocused on the unfinished business at hand. This time, he also had something important to discuss with Queen Herver. The war, which had dragged on until today, had caused serious disasters for the Demon King's army and Gazma. Herver listened to him, but her foot kept moving undisturbed. Humph, this is all what you wanted, isn't it? If the Demon King wants to say something, just say it. I will never betray Gazma. He wasn't angry at her words and continued to try to persuade her. I'm sure you've heard of the Heavenly Kingdom. The Archangel has 6 wings by nature. Even though she has fallen and now opposes the Church, it's clear that she's no ally of ours. A semi-divine level powerhouse couldn't be underestimated. No matter what was happening above, Herver wasn't paying attention and continued teasing him. Meanwhile, Flem, sitting next to him, quickly apologized when she heard him speaking. Your Highness, the Emperor, this is all my fault. I failed to manage things properly, which led to such a huge mistake. Morla didn't blame her. Instead, he gently reassured her. This isn't Flem's fault. The appearance of the fallen angel is tied to a higher level struggle. Your defeat was inevitable. Flem was taken aback. She hesitated before turning to him and asking again, you mean that the power of another Gazma has started to get involved? Herver's slender foot continued to inch his way up his ankle. Morla forced himself to speak through gritted teeth. Maybe it's not that bad yet, but we need to end this war as quickly as possible. Ending the war with the least cost was seen as the only way to avoid a disaster for both sides. Herver's foot slowly moved upward, gaining momentum until it reached his thigh, causing him to speak more awkwardly. He finally said to her, you should be the diplomatic ambassador for the Demon Lord's army. Herver seemed not to hear him. She became more aggressive, pressing her foot directly into his sensitive spot. He gasped, his eyes widening, and blood began to drip from his nose. He let out a loud shock scream. The sudden noise made Flem glance over in surprise. She looked worried and said, Your Highness? Morla's face turned dark, his patience wearing thin, and the table cracked under the pressure. Flem leaned forward to inspect, but he raised a hand to signal, I'm fine. Flem bent down to look under the table, her suspicions turning toward Herver. Herver, meanwhile, began to feel a little embarrassed. She clenched the fork tightly, thinking to herself that if the Black Spirit found out, she'd be treated terribly. It might actually be great, but it could also mean losing her chance to get closer to the Demon Lord. It was a tough decision, and she really wanted to stomp on him right then and there. He was currently watching Flem bend down, inspecting under the table, looking so uncomfortable that sweat started to form on his forehead. Flem, is there something wrong down there? Hearing his question, she slowly sat up. Oh no. Once she was seated again, she adjusted her glasses and said seriously, Your Highness, a Demon King's army has never set up foreign diplomatic missions before. It wasn't long before Herver, not taking things seriously, kicked his foot playfully at him. When he heard her, he replied, Just because it hasn't been done before doesn't mean it can't happen now. At the same time, Morla took off his shoes and responded to Herver's teasing, while continuing to discuss, Times have changed. The world has shifted. We can't hold on to the old ways if we don't want to fall behind. Herver, once again teased by him, involuntarily shivered. She stopped being the one to tease and instead began to shake with his playful advances. Seeing her reaction, he took the opportunity to push further. Flem looked at the king before her, a sense of deep admiration filling her voice as she hesitated before speaking. Your Highness, you truly think so deeply. Herver was at her limit. She interrupted Flem before she could finish her sentence. Shaking, she let out a seductive sigh. At that moment, even though she tried to silence herself, it was too late. Flem, now furious, slammed her hand on the table and shouted, Spirit, what the hell are you doing? I put up with you for long enough. Morla, visibly panicked, covered his face, sweating with worry. Calm down, Flem. Let's at least hear what she has to say. Herver also spoke up to distract her, his face still flushed as she continued to talk on and on. Aren't you still expecting me to risk my life for you all? He looked at her expression, his heart sinking even more. He wondered if he had stepped into something strange. But then he decided to set that aside and focus on the matter at hand. I've arranged a position for you. As for the 2 other captured elves, I'll release them to assist you. He raised his glass, speaking in a sincere tone, almost inviting her. What will you do? It's up to you. I respect your decisions." On the surface, he sounded calm, but inside, it felt as though he were standing at the edge of a cliff, his laughter shaky. "Run, run quickly. As a diplomat, it's completely normal to visit places. You need to leave right now, fast." In the Ministry of Foreign Affairs office, Herver's two servants spoke to her. "Your Majesty, we must escape." The red-haired servant took both of her hands and started speaking nonstop. "I have heard that damn demon lord said you were going to visit as an envoy. When the time comes, we can just run away." Herver, feeling awkward, wasn't sure how to respond. About that, the platinum-haired girl standing beside her also spoke cheerfully. "That demon lord is as dumb as a rock. If we really go to the Allied forces' territory, won't we be the ones calling the shots?" She clasped her hands together in admiration of her master. Only the Great Queen could think of enduring hardship to strategize for survival. But to their surprise, Herver pulled her hands away from the servant's grasp. She then turned around and firmly grabbed her own hands. "We won't be doing that." Both of them were taken aback by their master's response and hurriedly asked, "Your Majesty, what are you saying?" "Why not run?" The female servant, tears in her eyes, questioned her. "Do you really want to become a pawn of the demon army?" The platinum-haired servant beside her quickly tried to calm her down. "Please calm down." Herver, however, remained calm. "It's not like that. Of course, running away is easy." She turned her back to the two servants and sighed. "But it's a foolish and cowardly move. Running wouldn't change anything about the situation in Gazma. It would just keep us safe." She declared strongly to both of them. "On the other hand, staying with this demon army would make us like a nail driven deep into their ranks." Herver turned towards the books scattered across the floor and began speaking to her two guards. "Within the heart of the Demon King's army, we can gather important information without much effort. Even a small piece of news passed on to the Allied forces can influence the direction of the campaign, saving thousands or even millions of lives. Take the mysterious weapon the Demon King's army used in the ambush, for example. If it weren't for that weapon, our army wouldn't have suffered such a quick defeat." Her voice grew emotional, and she began to think about the soldiers who had fallen in battle, her tone trembling with emotion. "A weapon like that, isn't it worth our effort to gather information about it? Should we really wait until the Allied commanders risk their lives trying to figure out how to fight it?" One of the servants rushed to her side. "Your Majesty," they said, both embracing her, moved to tears. "Your Majesty, I never thought you'd think so deeply. I was wrong to doubt you earlier. We're so foolish compared to you," they sobbed. Herver comforted her servants. "It's enough that you understand. Now that we know our mission, we must work even harder. We can't let the Demon King's army figure out what we're up to." After a moment of intense emotion, the spirit servant hesitated before speaking up. "But how exactly should we proceed?" Herver answered, "If we try to take advantage of the situation too openly, the Demon King will quickly catch on to our plans. Of course, we need to pretend to take our diplomatic duties seriously and do the job the Demon King's army has given us." At that moment, Herver finally noticed the book on the table. It had the title, "Becoming the Master of the Workplace, Unlocking the Soul of the Worker." She looked at the book with a wicked smile. "It's not just about working hard. We have to work harder than the other parts of the demon army. If they work 10 hours, we work 16 hours. Her smile slowly grew more and more maniacal, her eyes turning a blood-red color, while a dark aura began to spread around her. "I want to defeat them." Her two servant subordinates carefully wrote down every word she said, but they seemed a bit confused. "But if we work that hard, what if we actually succeed?" Herver shifted her expression to a reassuring smile and turned to comfort them, holding a map in her hands. "Negotiations aren't something you can succeed at just by trying hard. Even though our alliance is made up of different races, whether it's a force or a nation, deep down they all share the firm belief that they will completely wipe out the demon army." She spread the map out on the table and continued. "And the ordinary people who have been conquered by the demon army, they will definitely hate that cruel army even more. They're hoping for the army of nobles, priests, and kings to lead them once again." Herver clenched her fist confidently. "With this belief, even if the demon army tries to sign a peace treaty with the alliance, it won't work. No one will accept it. No one can accept our efforts. We won't achieve anything." After hearing that, the red-haired spirit immediately put on the effort armband. "I understand. I'll work twice as hard. We absolutely can't let the demon lord look down on our coalition's performance." The platinum-haired girl also put on the striving armband, her excitement matching the spirit's. "Leave the translation work to me." Both of them picked up the scattered documents off the floor, speaking loudly and with enthusiasm. "Right now, I feel full of energy. I want to work overtime until morning. Maybe I can last until tomorrow morning, and if I do, I'll work until noon tomorrow." Meanwhile, Herver just stood there, watching the two of them, unable to say a word. The truth was, they were having so much fun that they didn't want to leave. How could she possibly say that out loud? Her brows twitched in mild regret. Elsewhere, Flem paced back and forth across the room, muttering to himself, "How ridiculous. A bunch of prisoners wanting to put in effort for our side. There must be some kind of plot." Asina sat on a pile of books on the floor, adjusting her glasses. "Lord Flem, you've been pacing for half an hour now. Walking back and forth like that is making me dizzy." It was then that she noticed another presence in the room. "Asina, what are you doing here?" The other person replied, "You've been walking back and forth for half an hour, and now you're finally noticing me." Asina smiled while holding a quantum mechanics book in her hands. "Didn't you stop your research?" Chief Engineer Priscilla was reassigned due to her promotion. The prince in the Imperial Palace replied, "Taking this opportunity to tell me to study hard, make progress whenever I can, and also." The more she spoke, the brighter her eyes became and her face turned a deep red. This entire weapon research depended entirely on the chief engineer. Even though she wasn't here, I couldn't back down. I was determined to give His Majesty a surprise. Suddenly, she asked Flem, "Well, if you're worried about the newly established Ministry of Foreign Affairs, why not just send someone there to gather intel on them?" Flem rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "We definitely need to gather information, and I already found someone for the job. I'm here because I'm waiting for her to show up." At that moment, a purple light suddenly appeared on the floor, quickly filling the room. A mysterious voice called out, making both of them turn around. "Well, are you discussing me? Looks like I arrived at the perfect time." A leg swiftly extended out from the purple magical circle. A girl with long, dark blue-black hair and short, curved horns, colored dark purple, emerged from the bathtub that had been transported into the room. After stretching her legs out comfortably, she turned to them and said, "Isn't this the smell of somewhere that's not hell? It's really unpleasant. This is Ghost, I bet." Asina was so shocked she stumbled over her words. "Ghost. What?" "Ghost." The ghost slowly stood up, the liquid from the bathtub dripping onto her body. In an instant, the liquid wrapped around her, gathering to form a tight-fitting outfit that clung to her body, making her appear even more mysterious and enchanting. Right. Heh. "I've arrived," she said with a grin. I bet took a deep breath and stretched, clearly annoyed by the world jumping. Her casual attitude was so annoying that Flem couldn't hold back and raised his voice. "I bet this is the Demon Lord's army, not your home." But she didn't seem to care at all. "Don't be so serious. The Demon Lord isn't even here right now. This is the perfect time for us to have some fun." Avet's ghostly figure floated closer to Flem and whispered, "How long has it been since we last saw each other? The last time was probably back in school. You were in interrogation studies, and I was studying demonology." Sighing in nostalgia, she bent down and reached out, gently patting Flem's shoulder as she teasingly added, "It's been such a long time, and you haven't even contacted your dear old friend." As she flirtatiously touched Flem's body, his face darkened, and he couldn't hold it in anymore. He grabbed her hand tightly and shoved her away. "Enough," he snapped, then shouted angrily, "Control yourself, Ghost. I didn't invite you here for this." Ivet wasn't offended, though. She just shrugged and sighed. Well, what a boring woman you are. Why don't you enjoy yourself like the other dark elves?" Turning her back, she casually continued, "I know you didn't invite me just to be a spy, right?" She spun around, casually sat on a pile of books, and smiled. "Of course, the main reason you called me here is because of my family's skill." She sat down, still smiling. "Telepathy. Since I graduated 100 years ago, I've never worked for the Hell Demon Lord. But don't worry, my telepathic abilities are the best in the Ghost Clan." Asina was still holding the incredible quantum mechanics book. The Ghost Clan could supposedly read minds, and they were legendary for it, naturally skilled in intelligence work, the top spies in Hell. It was said that no matter how evil a demon was, standing in front of a ghost would reveal a most innocent side of their heart. Ivet responded, "That's right. For example, your name is Asina. Even though you're a pacifist, hold on a second." Suddenly, she glanced at Asina, who was sitting on the floor, looking shocked. "Wait, but why does the Demon Lord's army have such a strange demon like you, and why are you in charge of weapon research?" Flem couldn't take it anymore and had to intervene. "Enough, Ivet. That's enough. Stop showing off your mind-reading abilities," he added, but she just glanced back at him, unfazed. "Don't worry, Flem. Right now, I still can't rid the minds of Saint-level experts. I won't uncover any secrets you're trying to hide," she said with a sly smile. Ivet's response made Flem blush, feeling embarrassed. "I'm just focused on serving the Demon Prince. There's no secret. It's just that the Demon Prince recently recruited a group of elf prisoners to serve as diplomatic ambassadors for the Demon Lord's army. For the safety of the army, I had to ensure the loyalty of the various factions." Ivet smiled and lightly parted her thin lips. "Ha ha ha, isn't it just espionage?" Two of her fingers suddenly glowed with a red-orange light. "The Ghost Clan is best at this kind of thing. But don't forget, we ghosts can even impersonate celestial angels or sneak into heaven. As she spoke, her fingers moved, weaving magic. After completing her transformation, she struck a seductive pose and asked, "So, how does it feel? Pretty intense, right?" Flem seemed completely unaffected by her charm, simply handing her a brown envelope. "I believe in your talent. If I didn't, I wouldn't have asked the Ghost Clan to send you here. But don't underestimate the sharpness of the Spirit Clan. Make sure they don't catch on to you, or it will put us at a serious disadvantage." Ibet, still smiling, took the envelope and slipped her hand into her cleavage. "Don't worry, I have the strongest ghost potion. We'll get the information you need from them," she said, pulling out a small vial of yellow liquid. "Do you want to try a bottle?" she teased. "This is the latest result from my research. It'll make your sensitivity increase 100-fold. In Flum's mind, she imagined the effect. Her eyes sparkled and her heart raced with excitement. She even touched her cheek, imagining that even the simplest of touches would bring overwhelming pleasure. But the twisted expression on Ibet's face and her words made Flum recoil in fear. Quickly turning away, she squeezed her eyes shut and shouted, "No." Ibet, standing next to her, looked confused. "Oh, so even 100 times more sensitivity isn't enough? You want something more intense?" With a sly smile, Ibet pulled out a small vial of blue liquid. "I also have the most powerful hypnotic drug here. Even the Demon King would become a puppet if he took this, doing whatever you tell him. You could make him do anything, no matter how humiliating." Her mind began to wander into thoughts that were far from decent. Flum's anger finally reached its limit. Her eyes turned bright red like blood, and a strong killing intent radiated from her. She barely managed to yell, "Get out." Ibet immediately turned and fled, laughing nervously. "Okay." The day after Ibet stepped out of the room, the door closed behind her, leaving Flem and Asina in silence. Asina, visibly worried about the new ghost, asked, "Flem, do you really trust this person?" After all, in the world of communication, as long as you get what makes you happy, a ghost could easily sell out anything. Flem remained calm, repeating, "Trustworthy." Since when did demons start using words like that? His gaze suddenly sharpened as he glanced at the door where Ibet had just left. "Right now, I just need a dog to help me keep an eye on those thieves with dirty hands. A dog that can bite people would be fine." Meanwhile, Ida walked down the hallway, her mind still racing with thoughts about the new demon lord. To have a demon with such a peaceful mindset study weapons, and to make an elf prisoner handle foreign diplomacy, the thinking of this new demon lord really is unpredictable. But with the wise mind of such a distinguished hellish demon lord, the more unpredictable the plan, the more likely it is to lead to unexpected and powerful results. This new demon lord, Lucifer Morlap, really was the biggest wild card in hell. No wonder he was the closest man to the demon god. Holding the envelope she had just received, Ibet's face flushed with excitement. "Haha, Prince Lilith, you were right. I won't let you down. As a double agent, I will definitely infiltrate Lucifer Morlap's inner circle, uncover all of his secrets and weaknesses. No one can stop you, Lord Lilith, from becoming the next generation's demon lord." In the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, everyone was discussing the plan. Suddenly, a voice of protest rang out. "This proposal won't work." Herver explained, "If we send an envoy for the first time and choose to engage with the Kingdom of Spirits, it'll definitely be seen as us having ulterior motives, unwilling to submit to the greater powers." One of Herver's servants asked, "What about sending an envoy to the Dwarf Kingdom instead?" Herver shook his head. "The dwarves have terrible tempers and are incredibly stubborn. They won't listen to our requests. The moment we arrive, they'll probably imprison us." She picked up a piece of paper, glanced at it, and read the comments aloud. "Also, this proposal for persuasion is way too poorly written. It's obvious from just one look that there's no sincerity behind it. We must show our genuine intent. We need to make them understand how tolerant and generous our Demon King's army can be." The red-haired elf, while taking notes, offered her opinion. "Your Majesty, perhaps a small human kingdom near the border of our Demon King's army's territory might work." She pointed to a region labeled Barren and said, "Barren Killa." Vera added confidently, "Its population is only about 3 million, and it's located right between the Allied forces and our Demon King's army in a contested area. If we can win this kingdom over, the odds in the war will definitely shift in our favor." Herver took the map, nodding in agreement. "This human kingdom is indeed important, but don't forget our true purpose. If we take control of the Demon King's army, we'll become traitors to the Allied forces." Vera, without hesitation, replied with confidence, "Your Majesty, there's no need to worry. If we manage to sway those smaller nations with shaky alliances, maybe we could truly bring them into our Demon King's army. But Baron Killa won't fall for it." Herver looked at her, feigning suspicion. She explained further, "The old king of the Baron Killa kingdom is the most steadfast supporter in Gazma. In fact, at first, he even personally led his army out of the city to fight against the Demon King's forces. So anyone could betray us, but this old king will never do that." Then she pointed to the sheet of conditions and continued. What's more, this recruitment offer includes a clause to renounce royal status, only keeping the wealth. Vera looked up, a smug smile on her face. Anyone would refuse something like being reduced to a commoner in the blink of an eye. They'll definitely turn us away if we go as ambassadors. Herver picked up the condition sheet and pondered for a moment. That does make sense. Vera pointed to the picture in Herver's hand and said, Also, Your Majesty, I've gathered an important piece of intelligence from the Demon King's army. We must send it to the Allied forces as soon as possible. The weapon that caused us so many losses earlier was created by Priscilla and Asena of the Demon King's army themselves. Herver looked at the picture, shocked, and said, Her. Then she sighed. I never expected her to betray us so completely. Herver's servant had another update. Regarding your intelligence, there's also a military report about the survival of the Allied forces. The servant quickly read from the notes. There's also a mysterious 7th Legion in the Demon King's army. They already surrounded the rear of the Allied forces' central region. The entire legion is made up of creatures from Hell who are skilled in a unique swimming technique. Because of this, they can travel thousands of miles across the vast ocean, even when the Allied forces are completely unprepared for it. 3 years before the war even began, this legion had already carried out a flanking operation. Based on the reports coming in, it's now time for them to execute a surprise attack. These creatures have a strange appearance, resembling a mutated version of mermaids. They have gills and limbs, and they are capable of swimming underwater. After hearing this, Herver's face turned pale. She turned to grab the servant's report and said, The Sea Army has been executing a flanking maneuver over a 1,000-mile journey for 3 years. She looked at the report, her face filled with fear. She realized that this wasn't just a show of overwhelming force. It seemed like a haphazard attack, reckless even. Herver's face grew even paler as she furrowed her brow, holding the report and thinking more deeply, as expected of the Demon King. He's attacking the invincible fortress, setting up ambushes in forests that can't be attacked, and now adding this 1,000-mile flanking maneuver. At first glance, it looks like random chaos, but in the end, it strikes at the weakest points of the enemy with a fatal blow. Although her outward expression showed fear and worry, in her mind, she couldn't help but admire him and felt a certain attraction. She clenched the paper tightly, pursed her lips, and thought, Damn it, this man is just so outstanding. Vera, noticing her, was a bit confused and spoke up, Your Majesty. Herver snapped out of her thoughts, embarrassed, and cleared her throat, pretending as if nothing had happened. It's nothing. We must hurry and deliver this important news to the Allied forces. Vera asked with concern, Well, what if the Demon King doesn't agree with our request? We've only just been established and we haven't been around long. Will he really allow us to leave the Demon King's city? Herver, hearing this, firmly spoke up, saying, I will go find the Demon King myself. We must seize this opportunity to send our delegation. Everyone's eyes sparkled with emotion at her words. Your Majesty, how touching, one of them said. They both imagined the scene of Herver boldly negotiating with the Demon King. In order for the Allied forces to win, Herver, not caring about the danger, was willing to persuade the Demon King herself. The two people standing nearby were deeply moved, while Herver calmly waved her hand and replied, It's just something I should do. But never mind, she thought something else. If the Demon King refuses, I will use every trick I know to make him agree. I'm sure I could even offer my own body to him if that's what it takes. What a cunning plan. A little later, Ibet walked in, cheerfully greeting everyone. Hello, everyone. Ibet had dark purple hair and a seductive figure as she introduced herself. My name is Ibet. Lord Flem sent me here to assist you all. From now on, we'll be co-workers. The three of them were silent, their faces showing no emotion at her introduction. Vera shot a glare at Ibet, silently cursing. Just as expected, she's finally here. A damn lapdog of the demon race. What a joke. She's clearly sent by the Demon King's army to spy on us, and yet she talks about being co-workers. Herver's servant wasn't any better than Vera. They cautiously glanced at the documents they had hidden earlier, making sure to keep them well out of Ibet's sight. There was no way they could let her find out that they were spies hiding within the Demon King's army. Herver looked at them with a look of disdain, not saying a word. Ibet looked at them, smirking proudly. Ho ho! So it turns out the entire Ministry of Foreign Affairs is full of spies, huh? Isn't that a bit too much of a coincidence? And I happen to be the undercover double agent. Although Herver wasn't happy inside, she still responded cheerfully, welcoming Miss Ibet's arrival. Do you have much knowledge of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs work? Ibet pretended to respond cheerfully. You're Princess Herver, right? It's an honor to be your colleague. It's just unfortunate that I'm not very skilled in diplomacy, so I hope everyone will be patient with me. Ibet then walked over to a chair, sat down gracefully, and continued. Just let me stay over here and observe and learn. The two servants, hearing this, began communicating through their thoughts. Is it really necessary to make surveillance sound so pleasant? One of them thought. Vera carefully reminded, "We need to use written communication or she'll catch on." The servant growled in frustration. "How annoying. If she finds out, we'll be dragged out and turned into a demon bank storage, won't we?" Hearing this, Vera responded in fear. Hoo-hoo. The demon's ultimate weapon really is unbeatable. Seeing the atmosphere, Ibet smiled faintly. "No matter how vigilant you are, it won't help. I've already seen through all your thoughts. But don't worry. As an opponent of Lucifer Morla, sent by Lord Lilith, I won't get in your way." However, Ibet turned to look at Herver as she signed her information, puzzled. Why can't I read her mind? She can't possibly be at the Saint realm. So does she have something special on her that blocks mind reading? Ibet bent down, smiling with delight. The Spirit Tribe's museum really is impressive. There's nothing wrong with it. After all, it's just their way of being cautious about me. Let them keep causing trouble. The more chaos they stir up, the better it will be for the demon army. Herver signed the paper while thinking, even though the demon race is truly despicable, her figure is absolutely perfect. That oval face is so captivating. Do all the women of the demon race grow up to be so breathtakingly beautiful? She held the paper, smiling in amusement, thinking, it's really too amazing. It was the picture of Ibet with her incredibly seductive, alluring figure and Herver's signature at the bottom. 3 days later, in the residence of the Demon Emperor, next to the window, light filtered into a corner of the room where Morla sat deep in thought. He looked down at the empty coffee cup in his hand, then raised it and spoke to the person standing behind him. "Polly, would you mind pouring me another cup of coffee?" Polly, dressed in a maid outfit, asked, "You just want me to pour another cup of coffee, right?" She crossed her arms and turned her head away as if in a little pout. Ha! Lucifer Morla froze, maintaining his posture, looking out where no one had been standing just moments before. A feeling of unease washed over him as he thought, "That's right, I sent the Saintess away, didn't I? I'm just not used to this." He moved closer to the table, pulled out a chair, and reminded himself, "It's just an illusion. It must be an illusion. She's clearly someone who would only bring me more trouble. So why do I feel like it's actually a good thing to have her around?" At that moment, there was a figure outside the door, accompanied by a voice announcing, "Your Highness, Prince of the Empire, Ambassador Herver urgently needs to report something to you." He stayed silent, his response cold and distant. After hearing that, he gave an order. "Let her in." Herver entered, holding a notebook in her hand, smiling gently. "Your Majesty, the diplomatic ministry has completed the first draft of the plan. We've also made all the necessary preparations to send it out." Flem was hiding just outside the door, peeking through the glass to listen in. Morla took the notebook from Herver's hands, quietly complimenting her. "Already have the plan ready? Your efficiency is impressive." Herver bowed slightly as she handed it over to him, responding with a smile. "If you trust us this much, we certainly won't let you down." Lucifer Morla held the diplomatic plan in his hands, feeling a bit confused. "This isn't..." His expression changed slightly as he stared at the notebook, uncertain. Was this really the diplomatic plan? Herver noticed his reaction and couldn't help but laugh inside. As expected, that was the look. She stood tall, hands clasped behind her, smiling sweetly while secretly pleased. After all, this was a plan from prisoners with a proposed visit to the Baron Killa Kingdom. Of course, he would be suspicious. Her face flushed slightly and she glanced at him, still deep in thought. Well then, in her mind, Herver excitedly imagined herself stepping on Lucifer Morla's body. I need to be bold and confront him directly. Face to face with him, her expression was filled with playful anticipation. She stared at him, skillfully guiding the conversation step by step, hoping to convince him that this was the best possible plan. The dark thoughts kept swirling in Herver's mind. That's quite convincing, isn't it? Herver's face was flushed, and he looked incredibly excited about his own thoughts. It's fine, it doesn't matter to me. I'm fine with anything. With a snap of his fingers, Lucifer Morla broke the chain of thoughts. He cheerfully agreed with the plan laid out in the book. Good approved. Herver, up at surprise, asked again, "What? Are you sure, my lord?" Holding the plan in his hand and reading it carefully, Lucifer Morla assessed it. The Baron Killa Kingdom, even in the middle stages of the game, is both rotten and tough for players to handle. To fight against the Demon King's army, the old king will stop at nothing and use the full strength of the entire nation. He gave a slight grin. The only reason to come here to recruit would be to escape. What else could it be for? Then he confirmed once more with Herver. Of course, I'm sure. Flipping through more pages, he continued to praise the plan Herver had put together. There's basically no better plan than this. Just follow your instincts and go with it. Herver, who hadn't expected Morla to agree so quickly without any hesitation, was left disappointed. He stammered, okay. As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately turned and left. Lucifer Morla watched him go with a puzzled look. She seems really disappointed. Was that just my imagination? Afterward, he tapped his fingers on the table, placed the plan down, and glanced at the person hiding outside the door. Then he smiled faintly and called softly, "Flem, what brings you here?" Flem stepped inside, standing right in front of him, and bowed her head to apologize. "My apologies, sir. It's not that I was eavesdropping, but I was just so worried about that woman. Herver's inconsistent behavior was disrespectful to your majesty, so I quietly followed her in here." Lucifer Morla looked at her with a sense of helplessness, forcing a smile as he explained, "Actually, I'm not trying to punish you. The Elven Queen has already left. If there's nothing else, you can go back to your work now." Only then did Flem raise her head, hesitating before speaking. "Well, actually, there's still something I need to report about Herver and her group." Lucifer Morla turned to face her, leaning on the desk with interest. "Oh? Go ahead, tell me." He chuckled inwardly, as if he already knew what she was going to say. Truth be told, he had already written the script in his mind. There was no need for her to explain. It was obviously about the lazy, scheming diplomats who were always slacking off, playing tricks, and twisting the truth. Ha ha ha! They were doing a great job at it. At this point, Flem quickly began her report. She described how Herver had been working tirelessly day and night within the diplomatic department, a level of dedication that made even her own subordinates feel ashamed. She recalled how Herver would personally oversee everything, ensuring that everyone worked at their full capacity. The diplomatic office was bustling even before sunrise. Until late at night, when people from other departments had already gone home to rest, the diplomatic department was still burning the midnight oil. Some of them even stayed overnight in the office. As day turned to night, while everyone else turned off their lights, the diplomatic office remained brightly lit. Flem spoke with excitement and enthusiasm. The demon she had sent to monitor Herver's team hadn't noticed anything unusual either. If every member of the Demon King's army had this kind of attitude, the entire Gazma region would have long been under His Majesty's control. Lucifer Morla listened to Flem's report stunned. He ripped the paper in his hands to pieces in shock. Ha! He clenched his teeth, staring at the torn-up plan with growing concern. No, the thing in the bag. This is too terrifying. Although this plan was extremely unreliable, Lucifer slammed the torn pieces of paper down onto the table. He ground his teeth, realizing his luck had been just as unreliable. The lessons of the present moment were piling up. He quickly stood up, rushing out while giving orders. "Flem, I just had a breakthrough on my strategy. You'll have to handle the official matters for a while. I need to go into seclusion." Flem was left confused, not quite understanding what was going on. He watched as Lucifer hurried off. "Huh? The Lord Emperor wants to go into seclusion?" Lucifer gritted his teeth and, with a serious expression, removed his outer coat. "I need to be cautious. Just in case I'm forced to go along with things, I'll have to hide within the Demon Lord's army. I can't keep wearing the Black Knight's outfit anymore." He tossed the coat aside and quickly made his way to the door, heading off to create a new set of armor for the envoy's camp. Outside, the sky was clear and blue. The group of envoys sat gathered around a warm fire, trying to warm their hands. The eldest brother grumbled loudly. "Going on an envoy mission? This is my first time. Honestly, why bother with diplomacy or surrender tactics? We could just launch a full-on attack and flatten the entire Gazma region right now." The second brother sitting across from him nodded in agreement and clicked his tongue in disappointment. "Exactly, and besides, this one looks too ugly. No thick, muscular build, no beautiful horns, and definitely no seductive, charming tail. Just a bunch of useless fat. Haha." At that moment, a demon with the face of a cow joined in happily, saying, "After we finish this battle, I'll head back home and get married." The older brother turned around and looked at Ramo, saying, "Hey bro, what do you think? You look pretty unfamiliar to me." And also, Lucifer Morla, disguised as Ramo, spoke up. The older brother eyed him suspiciously. "Why do you dress so differently from us?" Ramo turned his face to look at the group. He smiled slightly and said, "Are you talking about me?" The full moon lit up the night sky as a curious voice rang out. "Yeah, that's right. I've never seen you in the Demon King's city before, and you don't seem to have any of the usual demonic presence." The demonic beasts exchanged sharp, scrutinizing glances. The second brother pressed on, "Which faction are you from?" Ramo squinted and smiled, confidently pointing as he answered, "I was assigned here from the frontline army. I've earned a military merit, so I was rewarded with a position as a night guard in the diplomatic mission." But deep inside, he felt like he was sitting on a pile of hot coals. Were these people really this cautious? The older bear-like demon beside him continued to eye him with suspicion and asked, "Oh, what kind of military merit did you earn?" Ramo chuckled softly and casually said, "It was during the ambush at the Lima corridor. I managed to take down a lot of enemies in that battle." The second brother raised his hand to his chin. Glancing up at the eldest brother, they both pictured the scene Ramo described, the death and destruction surrounding them, smoke and flames engulfing the forest, and soldiers falling one by one. He asked, You mean the battle at the Lima corridor? Ramo waved his hand, laughing awkwardly, and replied, yes. He frowned, wide-eyed and worried. Oh no, could it be that the plan was exposed before it even started? As he was deep in thought, the two of them suddenly plopped down next to Ramo, trapping him in between. The eldest brother, grinning from ear to ear, cheered. Ha 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 ha. So someone actually went through a battle somewhere here. The second brother, the rhino, threw his arm around Ramo's shoulders, adding cheerfully, come on, tell us more about that battle. We gotta stay on guard here in the Demon King's city, and my whole body feels like it's falling apart. Ramo could only smile awkwardly, eyes wide in embarrassment. He humbly responded, actually, there's not much to say. It was thanks to the surprise attack by the enemy, the coalition of 100,000 troops. He paused, pretending to wipe his forehead, gritting his teeth as if holding back tears, and softly said, they all charged straight into our ambush. The new weapons we developed caused such devastation that the enemy was completely scattered. The rhino's second brother was tricked and looked confused, asking, huh, bro? Why are you crying? Ramo raised his hand and gave a small laugh, replying, I'm just so moved. This battle is so meaningful, and to be part of it. It's the greatest honor of my life. Suddenly, Ramo became emotional, tears filling his eyes as he said, please don't make me remember those painful things again. The older brother crossed his arms and closed his eyes, letting out a sigh. Truly, to have experienced that battle firsthand was an honor. To have such an understanding and to be so moved by it was something else. It seems you were a born warrior, he said with satisfaction, raising his hand. I've made up my mind. From now on, I'll be your big brother. Come learn from me. I'll show you how to build strong muscles and even how to carve a scar across your face that'll make you look irresistible. Ramo stared at him blankly. Huh. The second brother gently tapped Ramo's shoulder, closing his eyes and sighing. Then I'll be your second brother. From now on, your problems are my problems. Inside the Demon King's city, I'll have your back. Ramo looked at his hand in confusion. Huh. Still not understanding what was happening, the two men forced him to kneel on the ground. The moonlight lit up the whole dark sky, and shimmering flower petals fell down. The older and second brothers knelt before the food offerings and swore, Your Majesty, the Emperor of Heaven, we swear, from this day on, we three shall become brothers of another kind, born on different days, months, and years, and we will not die on the same day, month, or year. Ramo, still kneeling on the ground, clasped his hands and nervously shifted around, looking at the two of them in complete confusion. Ha! Ramo stood there, confused and surprised, and asked softly, wait, who are you all bowing to? Someone not far from them slowly walked over and spoke. Hey, Ibet, with a cold expression and arms crossed, calmly asked, what are you all doing over there? The beastman happily replied in unison, Lord Ibet, we just feel like we've known this little guy for ages, even though we just met, so we're just bonding a bit. She placed a hand on her hip and said sternly, all right, enough of that. I'm not interested in these things. Tonight, you all will be on night watch to guard the camp. Don't let anything slip through the cracks. They all bowed their heads in response, yes, ma'am. The second brother closed his eyes, frowned, and thought to himself, why do we still need to do a night watch in a place like this? The eldest brother chuckled to himself, I'll definitely train the third brother to be as tough and handsome as me. That way, he'll have no problem finding a wife. The bull-headed guy with flushed cheeks thought, just a little longer, and I'll finally see her again. Ramo remained silent, keeping to himself. Ivan noticed Ramo's confusion and thought, here's another person I can't use my mind reading on. He must have some kind of special item, similar to the Elven Queen's, or maybe his power is even stronger than mine. But no matter what, there's only one possibility. Spy. Ibet raised 2 fingers to her lips and smiled with delight. She was sure that Flem didn't trust her or the entire delegation, which is why she had arranged for such a discreet spy to be part of the team. If it weren't for her ability to read minds, she would have been completely fooled. But why was that woman staring at her and smiling? Why was the smile so creepy? Ibet licked her finger, then said, come with me. I'll give you a mission. Ramo pointed to his cheek and opened his mouth in surprise. Huh, me? Without wasting any time, she grabbed him by the collar and pulled him along. She said casually, yes, you. Follow me. Ramo stood there, eyes wide in shock. The older guy within raised an eyebrow in curiosity. Why is Lady Ibet taking our third brother aside? Does she want to gather intel from the battlefield too? The second brother spoke up confidently, big brother, you don't get it, do you? Lady Ibet is from the Ghost Clan. We may not like third brother's face, but the ghosts are different. They actually prefer that gentle, reserved look. And considering the ghost's needs, our brother isn't going to make it through tonight. One of the guys added, I have a friend who also fell into the hands of the ghosts. They all pictured the ghost girl, her hungry, enticing gaze. Finally, where did Grave come from? The big boss and his second-in-command stood in front of the tombstone. Third brother, be careful on your journey. The demon's pale face trembled, thinking, ghosts are truly terrifying. I really want to return tomorrow to see her. Meanwhile, on Ramo's side, he slowly walked toward the tent. He stepped inside and felt confused. What is she doing? Pulling me into this tent? What is this? Does she want to interrogate me? Ibet lay down on the bed, speaking softly, all right, take it off. Ramo stared at the scene in front of him, feeling uneasy. He hurriedly crossed his arms, stammering, wait a minute. Why are you suddenly telling me to take off my clothes? Ibet smirked, calmly taking off her shirt and saying, why? Can you be the one asking why? Ibet stretched out on the bed, resting her hand on her hips and cheerfully said, I'm a ghost. Isn't it natural to have certain needs? And your appearance happens to be just to my liking. Plus, if you're going to be a bodyguard for the envoy, your physical strength must be decent. Ramo clenched his fists and turned away, sweating slightly. He spoke up, I'm sorry, I already have a fiancé back home. Behind him, Ibet stood up, her hands radiating power. Her hand brushed lightly against his back as Ibet whispered, just take off your clothes. What's the problem? Can you really keep holding back right now? She smiled smugly. All she needed was for him to remove the charm he was carrying or let her check the flow of his magical energy, and she'd be able to confirm his identity. Ibet suddenly moved her hand between her thighs, kneeling down on the floor with a magical sealing circle. It was hard to believe. She curiously studied Ramo's back, thinking to herself that even her enchantment had been turned back on her. At the Ghost Academy, Ibet walked through a buzz of admiration. People were talking in awe. Look, that's Ibet. She graduated with the highest honors of the class. She's amazing. I've heard she only needed her enchantment spell to make anyone lose control. Ibet stood proudly, like a beautiful flower, as people around her whispered, if a ghost like me can be enchanted by her, anyone can. One brave ghost gathered the courage to step forward and ask, Sister Ibet, my grades have always been a little below average. Can you share any tips with me? Ibet gently cupped the girl's face and smiled. Don't worry. Everything the Academy teaches is already instinctively engraved in us ghosts. You just need to study a little. As long as you memorize the lessons, that's all you need. Ibet happily pointed to the magical guide with a pink heart on the cover. She snapped back to reality when Lucifer Morla touched her face. He looked at her with concern and asked, are you all right? Ibet hugged her face and replied, I'm fine. Confused inside. Huh? What kind of feeling is this? Shyly asking myself, is an enchantment just about controlling someone else's actions? Is this the same feeling caused by those potions that drive people crazy? Is this what the book was talking about? Ibet felt an explosion of emotions and realized, is this pleasure? Lucifer Morla stuttered in fear. Wait, you're acting completely different from how you were before, like nothing was wrong. He tried to run, but Ibet grabbed him. Inside, Ibet was conflicted. Although Ibet had often seen others make expressions like this, it was the first time experiencing it themselves. Ibet's face turned bright red, hands crossed over the chest, feeling uncomfortable, thinking, this is such a strange feeling. Internally, Ibet muttered to themselves, my body isn't listening, my mind feels foggy, like there's an overwhelming thirst for knowledge rising up inside me. I really want to understand what this is all about. Suddenly, Ibet snapped out of it. But before marriage, Ibet slapped him hard across the face and he was sent flying out of the tent. Morla, confused, muttered, what kind of crazy woman is this? Inside the tent, Ibet was still unsure, thinking, what should I do next? The scene shifted to the Baron Killa Kingdom's castle, where the guard announced, Your Majesty, the Demon Lord's army has sent word. Before the guard could finish, the king shouted, yeah. Seeing the king throw a shattered head nearby, the guard grew terrified and screamed, didn't I already tell you? We only attack when it comes to the Demon Lord's army. Gripping the cloth tightly in his hands, he repeated, attack, we must attack. The king coughed violently in anger. The guard continued his report, Your Majesty, this is a diplomatic request from the Demon King's army. Moreover, the envoy representing them is none other than a princess of the Elven Kingdom, Herver. Herver was defeated and taken prisoner, but she secretly sent someone to meet with us. She claims that her actions were merely a ruse. She has important intelligence related to the Demon King's army that she wants to share with us. The king was skeptical. Herver? Who can say if she was truly embedded within the Demon King's army or if she has already betrayed us? The old man ordered, then let the Demon King's envoy come. But we must show our strength first. Order the border defenses to be reinforced and then imprison the entire envoy of the Demon King's army in the dungeon. That way, our private meeting with Herver won't seem too strange. The guard quickly obeyed, shouting, Your Majesty is wise. The king asked, Is there anything else to report? A long cough followed, signaling that the old man was growing weak. The guard, trembling, reported, "Your Majesty, in the past month, there have been numerous peasant uprisings throughout our kingdom. Many people in the cities have joined the rebellion, especially in the eastern regions where the situation is not looking good. As a result, some in our ranks believe we should reduce the war taxes." The king angrily shouted, "Idiots, all of you are idiots. You can't see the bigger picture. To drive the demon army out, for the sake of the gods, what's wrong with enduring some hardship for a while?" After speaking, the king slumped down, and the soldiers panicked, shouting, "Your Majesty." He waved them off and said, "I'm fine," before standing up and giving an order. "Anyone who dares to rebel, kill them without hesitation," King said firmly. "Everyone, just bear with it a little longer. I'll take the blame for the bad reputation." Meanwhile, in the eastern part of the barren Killa kingdom, the soldiers were determined to break through the city, shouting loudly, "Kill." The defenders, terrified, cried out, "There are too many of them." The enemy truly was overwhelming. If they had known this would happen, they wouldn't have hesitated over their possessions. They should have just run away from the start. The general rushed over, grabbed a soldier by the shoulder, and urgently asked, "What's going on?" as the demon army attacked. The soldier quickly replied, "No, General, it's the rebels. They've come to kill us." The general didn't believe it and shouted, "Are we really going to be defeated by a few hammers and sickles? What happened to the invincible mages? Get them here to push the rebels back. Have they run out of magic power? Didn't we agree to give them unlimited magic potions for free?" The soldier hurriedly responded, "That's not the problem, sir. They've turned. All our mages have rebelled." The city gates opened, and the mage at the front signaled for everyone to move this way. The rebels charged in, shouting loudly as they raised their swords, "Follow me. Break through. Take the supplies." Through the lens of the telescope, the view revealed a massive army, thousands of soldiers and horses stirring up dust across the vast plain. Seeing this, a panicked voice cried out, "That's the power of the Demon King's army." As soon as the words were spoken, voices erupted from the soldiers on the western walls of Baron Killa, discussing a frenzy. So the rumors were true? Are we really going to negotiate peace with the Demon King's army? A soldier in shining iron armor couldn't hide his excitement. Is peace really coming? Does that mean we won't have to fight anymore? Another soldier chimed in, "We should have stopped fighting a long time ago. I heard the rebels are as numerous as bamboo shoots. At this rate, they might break through the outer city walls of the royal capital soon." A sharp slap suddenly landed on the soldier who spoke. The blow caught him off guard, and blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. The silver-armored officer, with a gleaming sword at his side, stepped forward, glaring fiercely at the soldier and growled, "Shut your mouth. If it weren't for our lack of manpower, you'd be considered a rebel and lose your head right now." The soldier who was slapped covered his face, trying to hold back his tears, while the other soldier nervously nodded in compliance. "Yes, sir." After the show of authority, the officer leaned over the wall, surveying the battlefield with a serious tone. "Whether or not we fight is a decision made by the higher-ups. Your job is to focus on your duties and stay in line." The sun blazed down on his bald head, shining off it like a reflector. Observing the scene below, he cracked a grim smile and said, "Take all your weapons and hand them over to me. Get ready to welcome the Demon Lord's envoy." Meanwhile, the group was slowly making its way into the city. Leading the pack was Herver, slender and graceful, with two servants at her side. Behind them was Ibet, her demeanor quiet and contemplative. Bringing up the rear were three large, imposing demons and a somewhat slender figure at the very end of the line. None of them were aware of the pair of eyes watching them closely from atop the towering city wall. The group, led by Herver, had been walking in silence when suddenly the soft murmur of conversation from the two servants caught their attention. Vera tilted her head and whispered, "Did you hear anything strange last night?" The other servant covered her mouth and replied, "You mean that sound that kind of resembled a cat's meow?" "Yeah, I heard it. I have no idea what it was, but it was so loud that I couldn't get a decent night's sleep." Ambit, walking just behind the two women, briefly lost her focus. Anyone walking closely beside her would have easily noticed the slight unease in her eyes. Lost in thought, she blushed and privately thought to herself, "This is so embarrassing. I can't control myself. This feeling is way too much to handle." With that, she glanced down at herself as if giving herself a quick self-check. Her tight white top revealed a hint of an alluring curve, and her black skirt hugged her full hips. Her black tights were flawless, and her high heels matched perfectly. The necklace around her neck accentuated her slender, graceful neck, while her carefully styled purple hair fluttered in the wind. In her hand, she held a sealed envelope. After making sure there were no loose ends, Ida let out a sigh of relief and reassured herself. Good thing she had brought a backup outfit. But as she thought about it, Ivic couldn't help but focus on the young man at the end of the line. This young man is Ramo, the third brother. His body is thin and still seems to be growing. He's wearing a red coat with golden fur trim and a sparkling necklace, while his cat-like ears twitched, listening carefully to the surroundings. His appearance looks harmless, but there's something about him that makes Ibet uneasy. Who exactly is he? Honestly, he seems a little too perfect, almost too flawless. The brute continued to move slowly, and the massive city gates ahead swung open. In the distance, some soldiers could be seen waiting. Herver paused in her steps, turned around, and spoke to the group, her tone firm. We're about to enter the kingdom of Baron Killa. I still hope everyone will stay alert. As they got closer, a bald officer was already waiting. He greeted them with a broad smile, saying, "Welcome to the Demon King's delegation. I am the officer assigned to guide you all." He gestured for them to enter, raising his voice in a manner that sounded overly enthusiastic. "Welcome to the kingdom of Baron Killa." Tall buildings stood closely together, but there was no sign of prosperity. Instead, the place felt desolate and abandoned. The streets were lined with people lying in disarray. The area was a mess of broken debris, and the group moved ahead with a few members leading the way, while Ramo quietly followed behind, taking in the surroundings. His eyes landed on the pitiful sight of a disheveled figure slumped on the side of the ruined street, a truly sorrowful and bleak scene. A thought echoed in Ramo's mind. This is the kingdom of Baron Killa. Ramo's gaze quietly withdrew after scanning the entire scene and the people around him. It was hard to imagine the level of destruction here. The state of this place made Ramo suspicious. This was supposed to be the most impregnable kingdom in the game. How could it look like this? The soldiers leading the way marched ahead. The group followed in silence, and eventually someone dared to speak up. "This is awful. Did a disaster hit the Baron Killa kingdom?" Herver lowered his head, deep in thought, his face full of sympathy. It wasn't a natural disaster. This is a man-made catastrophe. The ruined buildings, the starving people, wandering the streets. As he witnessed all the devastation, Herver paused and quietly assessed the situation. Though he didn't want to admit it, he hadn't seen anything like this on the journey from the Demon King's castle. Even in lands ruled by the Demon Army, this level of ruin was unfamiliar. Suddenly, a frail, emaciated figure collapsed in front of them, falling right into the boots of the officer leading the group. The man lay sprawled on the dusty ground, gasping for breath but unable to get up. His son, standing behind him, began wailing uncontrollably, crying out, "Father! Father!" The officer, annoyed at being blocked, shouted harshly, "Out of the way, filthy peasant!" The child continued to sob, desperate and seemingly at the end of his rope. The boy threw himself at the officer's legs, clinging desperately and begging, "Please, please save my father." Without any mercy, the officer raised his foot and kicked the boy in the face. Then, with a grunt, he shoved the child away, kicking him again and cursing, "Get off me, you filthy brat." As if still angry from being tainted by something filthy, he swung his sword up, eyes full of murderous intent. "I think you're all looking for trouble." The deadly blade swung toward the boy, but with a loud clang, the sharp sound of metal on metal rang out, and the cursed sword was stopped by another sword. A massive black bear with a shield shining like polished bronze on its shoulder firmly held a large sword, blocking the officer's murderous strike. The bear's deep voice rumbled with authority. "That's enough. As a warrior, you shouldn't be attacking unarmed civilians." The officer seemed to have never been insulted like this before. His words caught in his throat, and he couldn't let the humiliation go. His eyes narrowed as he gritted his teeth and hissed, "Why is a demon like you sticking your neck out for them? What's it to you?" The bear, now furious, raised its paw, claws sharp and ready, and answered back, "This has nothing to do with race. This is about the honor of a warrior like me." The bald officer, his face dark with anger, looked up at the bear's broad back as it turned away, a bitter resentment bubbling in his mind. "Damn, is this guy crazy? I was planning to drag them to the middle of the city and use some excuse to start a fight, but it's because of these damn peasants that it's all ruined. And that demon bear is huge, way too big." His gaze then shifted to two towering figures standing nearby. One was a winged man with large folded wings hidden behind his back, his body thick with muscle and a fierce, terrifying face. The other was a bull man, aggressive in posture, with horns that looked like they could pierce anyone who dared step too close. The bald officer ground his teeth and muttered under his breath, "Isn't there anyone normal around here?" Then suddenly the young man, who had looked like a quiet little kitten lost in thought, raised his hand to absent-mindedly scratch his nose, as if deep in some wild, tangled thoughts. The officer saw an opportunity. It was his chance to redeem himself, and it was right in front of him. He felt a surge of excitement, as if he won a small victory. The kitten-like kid wasn't even as tall as he was. Ramo, lost in his thoughts and not paying attention, heard a loud shout aimed directly at him. The officer charged toward him, pointing a finger and yelling aggressively, trying to take control. "I can't keep putting up with your demon scum anymore." Ramo looked around, his hand pointing to himself, as if checking to make sure the officer was talking to him. The officer, seeing Ramo's clueless expression, grew even more angry, his eyes widening, trying to look more intimidating. Now, I'll arrest you. Before the officer could finish his sentence, the calm little kitten had transformed into a fierce, fluffy, angry cat demon. A strange shadow enveloped him like a dark, flickering flame or a protective shield around a demon king. The shadow flared up, its sinister, menacing energy giving off a sense of death and destruction, as if it were about to tear everything around it apart. Ramos still looked naive, his hands still pointing to himself, but his voice had turned cold, carrying a threatening edge. Arrest me. How? The officer stood frozen, mouth agape, completely shocked. He never expected this sudden, terrifying transformation to have such an impact. He collapsed to the ground, kneeling with his head bowed so low it seemed he could no longer see the sun, still muttering stubbornly, "Catch them." The officer's unusual posture, kneeling and submissive, was likely driven by his survival instincts. A memory from long ago suddenly resurfaced in his mind. He painfully recalled, back when I still had hair, he was kneeling just like this too afraid to lift his head and face the power before him. King Baron Killa turned his back on him. His voice was calm, but it was filled with fury. Without looking back, he asked in a low voice, "Are you the soldier who was so terrified that you stood frozen in the middle of the battlefield, too afraid to move forward?" The king shot at him a sharp, icy glare, his tone now firm. "Speak. What happened?" He fought to stop his hands from trembling as he kept his position, kneeling, hesitating before he spoke. This is my first time on the battlefield. The demon army, they were clearly not just strange looking, like the rumors said. He suddenly fell silent, struggling to suppress the lingering terror, carefully choosing his words before continuing. Behind them, there were shadows, terrifying shadows. I shuddered as those nightmarish images flooded back into my mind. He did notice the subtle change in the king's gaze. After a moment of contemplation, the merciful king spared his life. "All right then, I'll forgive you for this act of cowardice." The king extended his hand toward me. "Get up. But remember, this is the only time I'll show mercy. Don't be afraid of what you've seen. It's a precious gift that the true God has granted us. Be proud of it, and then think about how to use it. You have a talent just like mine, like a wild animal born knowing how to avoid danger. Our eyes can clearly see the threats from our enemies." The king's last words seemed to fade into the distant horizon, yet they also felt like a wake-up call, a warning meant for the officer like him. At that moment, the officer snapped out of his thoughts. He couldn't rise to his feet yet, but he lifted his head, gritted his teeth, and shot a hateful glare at the newcomers. You're right. Your demon army is truly full of deceitful hearts. Where are they? Where are they?" He pointed angrily at the group and shouted, "Seize them, now." At his command, the soldiers immediately drew their weapons and surrounded the group, ready to fight. Big Brother Bear and Second Brother Feet weren't pushovers either. They quickly drew their weapons, moved into position, and shouted, "Fall back." They didn't show any fear at being surrounded. Instead, they looked on with anger and disdain. "You humans are so treacherous." Seeing the situation change rapidly, Herver quickly reacted, shouting, "Stabilize the situation, no one move." Hearing the command, the bear-like man briefly glanced at Herver, his eyes filled with anger and suspicion toward those around him. After confirming that his men were still holding their ground, the bear turned to express his frustration to Herver, his voice low and resentful. "My lord, this is clearly a trap. We shouldn't have left the entire guard outside the city. Humans don't follow the rules." His second in command quickly agreed, "You're right, big brother. Let us go out and take care of them." "Third brother, why are you just standing there?" Herver felt a headache coming on. These soldiers were so straightforward. All they knew was to eat and fight. The third brother, who had just been called out, was still standing there dazed, mumbling unintelligibly. His ears stood straight up in alertness, but his eyes were blank, clearly not understanding what was going on. Well, he really didn't understand. If someone could explain it to him, it would go something like this. The situation had changed so quickly. They didn't know if the plan had failed or what they should do next. They also didn't understand why the people in front of them suddenly knelt down and started calling themselves Lucifer or whatever. As for the guy standing beside him, despite huffing angrily and holding a sledgehammer with impressive strength, he looked tough and imposing, but was really just making noise with no deeper strategy. The bullman only thought one thing: "I can't fall here. I must go back and get married." I bet could tell the situation was getting out of hand. She shouted loudly, forcing everyone's attention to her. "Everyone stop. Put down your weapons for the greater good. We can't afford any mistakes." Standing in the center, surrounded by her guards, I bet quickly used her authority to take control of the situation. Her tone was firm as she spoke. "I am the supreme representative of the Demon King's army. I am a high-ranking demon from hell. Are you telling me you won't even listen to me? Leave everything to me. I'll handle it." After hearing her words, the guards finally kneeled, accepting their orders. In unison, they responded, "Yes, Lady Ibet." Once her side was under control, Ibet turned around and, with humility, addressed the officer who was still glaring at her, unable to stand up. Her voice softened. "I hope you can give me an explanation." Herver also bent forward, stepping closer to Ibet. "I'll say it again. I want an explanation." Before she could get a satisfactory answer, Ibet's attention was drawn to the two servants whispering behind her back. They were huddled together, speaking quietly. Before she could overhear anything, a noise from the other side caught her attention. The bald officer, grumbling, struggled to get up. He wasn't fully standing, but his voice was still defiant. "How dare you?" There's nothing to explain to the lapdogs of the Demon King's army. The sky was painted with a deep, fiery red, and a cold, chilling command pierced through the air. Throw them all into prison. Inside the prison in the kingdom of Baron Killa, the guards were chatting loudly. "We were once in charge of guarding the Demon King's army prisoners. That's something we'll be bragging about when we get old." A different voice spoke up next. "So what? If we could capture the Demon King's generals, that would be a real achievement." One of the guards immediately interrupted. "Don't get your hopes up. The Demon King's generals are all at the Saint level. There aren't even enough people in the entire Gazma region to count them on one hand." The other guard jokingly added, "If we could capture a general, why not just capture the Demon King too?" They both laughed heartily, enjoying the irreverence of their words. Inside the tightly sealed cell, Ramo, feeling bored, crossed his arms and leaned against the iron bars, listening to the guards' gossip. When he heard their reckless comments, he couldn't help but sneer inwardly. Even if they did catch the Demon King, I wouldn't want to be involved. Forget it. It doesn't matter anyway. What's important right now is... Ravo sighed in frustration, glancing at the figure with purple-tinted hair standing behind him. He muttered, "Why do I have to be locked up with her?" It was as if Ibet could read his thoughts. She shot him a sharp, dagger-like glance and pouted, clearly displeased. "Is it that bad being locked up with me? The Ghost Clan isn't that bad, you know. If you couldn't, would you just turn invisible and vanish, Ramo?" Was she really focusing on that right now? But if he didn't respond, it wouldn't sit right with him either. Rambo stretched out his hand, putting some distance between them, his posture clearly showing he was about 3 meters away, not holding back in his attempt to insult her. "I'm afraid you're just like you were back at the camp, all fierce and aggressive like a wolf or a tiger. Honestly, I can't stand it. How could Ibet's pride possibly handle this kind of teasing?" But still, she gritted her teeth and yelled back, "You still think you're the one at a disadvantage, right?" Then Ibet, puffing out her cheeks like an angry hedgehog, firmly responded, "That was just an accident. I'm absolutely certain it won't happen again." Ramo crouched down, sitting casually, acting like a gentleman as he changed the subject. Well, let's not talk about this anymore." Ramo's casual posture, sitting on the ground, seemed laid back and natural, but his tone was still serious. "Aren't you even a little worried? Aren't you afraid they'll throw us in prison and execute us?" Ibet closed her eyes, not looking at him, and answered calmly, "Look at you. Don't worry, humans won't do anything to us. If they were planning to, would they really need to lock us up first?" Ramo was momentarily at a loss for how to respond to her logic, so he just asked again, "Are you really that sure?" Ibet tossed her hair with a graceful motion. "It's my instinct. Believe it or not, that's up to you." Ramo was left speechless, truly unable to say anything. At that moment, Ibet's expression turned serious again. She remembered the sneaky whispers of the two servants and thought to herself, "Do they want me to tell them I can read minds through those two spirit servants? I already know their entire plan." At this moment, she turned around, leaned her back against the bars, crossed her arms, and gave Ramo a quick glance from the corner where he was sitting all alone. She silently observed him, but for some reason, she didn't feel like she had it all figured out. The truth was, that bald officer had really been scared by him. Ibet walked toward Ramo, and seeing how dejected he looked, said, "Stop putting on that face." Ramo looked up, confused, and met her gaze. Ibet leaned in slightly, her chest subtly pressing against her clothes, and with a gentle, caring tone, said, "It's fate that we're locked up together like this. Aren't you going to tell me your name?" Though Ramo seemed cautious, he couldn't sense anything wrong and just answered casually, "My name." Ramo." Ibet raised an eyebrow and repeated, "Ramo? Sounds like a fake name." Ramo frowned, defending himself. "What do you mean fake?" Ibet chuckled softly, covering her mouth, teasing him. "I was just joking. Don't take it so seriously." But even though she acted calm on the outside, her mind was quietly working. She couldn't read his thoughts directly, but with a few tricks up her sleeve, she could still gather some insight. Perfect. She'd take her time to learn more about him. Ibet leaned in a little more, but this time she leaned just a bit too far, losing her balance and stumbling forward. Her hands instinctively went to the wall that Ramo had been leaning against for support. Her chest, firm and full, pressed against him with a surprising force, coming dangerously close to his face in a teasing manner. Ramo, stunned by the sequence of events, was left frozen, his expression blank. He let out a quiet, confused sound, his eyes briefly falling on her chest, which was now just inches from his face, and the deep curve of her body that drew his gaze up to her delicate chin and tempting lips. But what could he possibly say in that moment? With a sigh of frustration, Ramo muttered, "Not again." Ibet adjusted her posture, eyeing the bracelet on her wrist that was faintly glowing with a bright pink light. She thought to herself, could it be that this bracelet is limiting my magic? She glanced down at her revealing outfit, a tight-fitting garment that clung to her body. Her body was trembling oddly. She pressed her legs together tightly, trying to suppress the overwhelming emotion she was feeling. Good thing I changed clothes today, she thought. The last outfit required magic to stay in place. If I had worn that, I can't even imagine what would have happened. The two of them were so close now. Her chest was pushed out behind her, and her short skirt was riding up, exposing just a hint of what was underneath. The black stockings added to the mysterious look. Ibet was stunned, but without magic, her body couldn't hold back. She felt like she couldn't control herself any longer. Meanwhile, Ramo, poor guy, was sitting huddled up, clutching a pillow tightly and not daring to move. His mouth was wide open, gasping for air, his vision completely overwhelmed by the overwhelming situation before him. Ibet wasn't doing much better. Her legs were still tightly pressed together, trembling as she tried to hold herself together. Her willpower was quickly fading. The body's needs were so urgent, there was no way to fight them off anymore. Ibet placed one hand on the wall, the other covering her mouth to keep herself from making any embarrassing sounds. She squeezed her eyes shut, refusing to look around. All of her focus was on keeping the urge in check. All she could think about in that moment was one thing. I really need to use the bathroom. The guard, annoyed, shouted, "Stop calling. Just say what you want already." Ibet trembled and asked, "Is there a bathroom here? Let me out so I can take care of something. Once I'm done, I'll return to the cell and continue being locked up." The guard refused. "Do you really believe that kind of request? Prisoners handle things in their cells." Ibet, furious, kicked the ground and cursed. "Right now, I'm not allowed to use my power, so I can't kill you. But trust me, the cup is full." She squirmed in discomfort, watching as Ibet shook from holding it in. Ramos stood up and said, "Honestly, you can just take care of it in the cell. Isn't it true that your ghost tribe doesn't care about privacy at all?" Ibet gritted her teeth, trembling, and with tears threatening to fall, she cried out, "No, absolutely not. I'd rather die than do that." He turned away and reassured her, "Don't worry. I'll turn around and close my eyes. I won't look. Just take care of it quickly." Ibet, embarrassed, shouted, "You think just turning away will solve it? You can still hear, you can still imagine it. Just those two things alone would be enough to make you eat 3 big bowls of rice." Ramo, annoyed, replied, "Who could possibly stomach that?" He told himself, "So there are still normal people in this world, but why does it have to be a ghost? The Saintess and the Elf Queen really need to take their studies more seriously." Suddenly, there was a loud explosion. Ramo anxiously shouted, "That sound, what's happening outside?" Ibet, feeling doubtful, thought, "An explosion. Could something have happened to the Elf Queen?" She grimaced and muttered, "Ugh, this window is too high. The only way to check the situation outside is to ask him for help." But even though she was a little uncomfortable and needed to go to the bathroom, Ibet reassured herself, "No, this is a great opportunity to help with a plan to expose the Demon King's army secrets. I can't let anything go wrong for the Elf Queen. I have to hold it in. Stay focused. I can't let the situation get out of hand." Ibet shook with nervousness and said, "Ramo, kneel down. I need your help." He was puzzled. "Huh? Are you okay now?" As he knelt down, he asked, "Why do you suddenly want me to kneel?" His face turned pale as he thought in fear. "Wait a minute." Ramo panicked. "I underestimated you. What are you planning to do? That kind of graphic work? No, it shouldn't be done, and it can't be done. No way." Ibet lowered her head and ordered, "Turn around. We don't have any magic right now. I need you to carry me up so I can check the situation outside." Ramo closed his eyes and turned around, still confused. "But wasn't it just a moment ago that you were in a hurry? Are you sure there's no problem?" Ibet sat on his shoulders and replied, "I'm fine. What's urgent now is to confirm the situation. Get up." Looking through the small gap in the window, Ibet said, "Let me see what that explosion just was." A fiery bullet shot through the air like an arrow, hitting with a huge explosion. Rocks and debris flew everywhere. Suddenly, Ibet clenched her teeth and cried out. Oh, she held her head and screamed. Her legs wrapped around Ramo's head, distorting his face as he grimaced, and the cup of water tipped over, spilling out like a stream, running through the cracks in the rocks. Ibet blushed deeply, growing in embarrassment. She wanted to die of shame. Ramo shoved Ibet off, and hot water splashed onto his head and neck. Meanwhile, Ibet had fallen to the ground, and he bit his lip, a tear running down his face as he sobbed, "Just let me die." Light shone through the window into the cell. Ibet slowly regained consciousness. Ramos sat in a corner, looking disheartened, and spoke up. "You're awake." This made Ibet jump in surprise. Ibet pushed herself up with her hands, her face twisted in discomfort as she snapped. "Why are you acting like you've been dirty or something? It's disgusting." Ramo, tears still streaming down his face, replied, "Even though I know it was probably just an accident, I don't have some weird fascination with this. Do you expect me to smile?" Ibet touched her head, looking confused. "What's going on? What are you saying? It feels strange, like I've forgotten something important." Ramo, hearing this, suddenly realized something. He placed his hands on the ground, his mouth open in surprise. You've lost your memory." She turned to him, confused. "Lost my memory? Did something important happen just now?" Ramo seemed a bit uneasy. He waved his hand, stuttering. No, nothing important. Nothing that would need you to recover your memory." She looked at him with curiosity. Ramo's face turned pale as he thought hard. Thankfully, the magic seal didn't restrict him too much, so he managed to clean both his and her clothes just in time. The one thing only he knew was that it had never happened before. Ibet touched her head again, her gaze thoughtful. "It's strange. What exactly have I forgotten?" Her eyes suddenly widened as if she had realized something, and she felt like she had lost something important. She sat quietly, lost in thought. Was it related to the Elf Queen's matter? In the Baron Killa Palace, a voice came from within the royal hall, near the throne. "Queen Herver, it seems you've had to spend some time in the dungeon. That must have been tough." Herver responded warmly. "For Gasma, it was all worth it." The king closed his eyes and asked, "Do you have any important intelligence that needs me to announce to the other nations?" Herver extended her hand, and a jade green stone hovered above her palm. She gazed at the stone and spoke. "The intelligence about the secrets of the Demon King's army is overwhelming. For example, the kind of weapon that caused our entire army's defeat, and the fact that the Demon King's army is planning a surprise attack from thousands of miles away." Herver continued, "And the one who invented this secret weapon is none other than Princess Priscilla of the Dwarf clan." The king looked at the letter in his hand and said, "Is all of this true? A plan this terrifying, with all of Gasma's forces focused on the front lines against the Demon King's army, the coastline has no defenses. We truly can't withstand a surprise attack. We must immediately alert all the other nations." The king gave a serious order. "Queen Herver, this intelligence is of immense importance. You must be even more vigilant while undercover in the Demon King's army. You must not be discovered." Herver responded with resolve. As long as she could contribute to driving out the Demon King's army, she clenched her fists firmly. "Even if I have to give my life, it will be worth it." Suddenly, a girl appeared behind her and complimented, "Well said. That voice, it's unmistakable." Herver slowly turned around, surprised to see the person who had just appeared. Sylvia. Sylvia clasped her hands together, speaking with admiration. "You're really her sister." She gave Herver a tight hug and smiled brightly. "Seeing you safe and sound, that's all that matters." Herver laughed happily and teasingly said in a soft voice, all right, you're not a little kid anymore." The king stood up from his chair and spoke sincerely. "I have to admit, even though I received your secret message, I still had some doubts about you joining the Demon King's army." He slowly walked toward them, then added, "But Sylvia, you are the only one who fully believes in you without question." When she heard about the upcoming trip, Sylvia quickly made her way over, having been waiting in the capital all along. She hugged Herver tightly and said, somewhat grumpily, "I told you from the start, no matter how powerful the Demon King is, no matter what he does, there's no way she would ever become a servant under his army." Herver chuckled and gently tapped Sylvia on the head, offering some guidance. "You're the princess of the elven race, after all. Be mindful of your image and try not to speak so recklessly." The king looked at the scene before him and covered his mouth with a cloth, coughing a few times to ease the awkwardness. I must admit, I'm still a little curious about what conditions that Demon King offered to get you to come here and negotiate with the kingdom of Baron Killa." Herver responded, saying, "Your Majesty, please don't laugh. Let me explain. First, after all the land of the kingdom of Baron Killa falls under the control of the Demon King's army, all the nobles will be stripped of their titles, reduced to commoners, and have all their wealth and status taken away. Even you, your Majesty, will have to abdicate the throne and become a commoner as well." The king smiled, raising his hand in a somewhat apologetic gesture, and said, "An absurd idea like that. Did someone actually think it up?" Suddenly he froze, his eyes widening in shock. "Oh," he muttered, glancing over at the two sisters, then snorted. From a distance, Sylvia shouted, "Oh, what's that oh for?" Sylvia's face darkened, her gaze sharp and pointed. "You old fool, didn't my sister tell you not to laugh? Are you laughing at the Demon King's army, or are you laughing at my sister?" Herver smacked Sylvia on the head and shouted, The king is our ally. Watch your words. Sylvia flinched from the unexpected smack, letting out a soft ow. The old man stood helplessly to one side. The king frowned, clearly irritated. Of course, I was laughing at the Demon King. It seems he has no intention of negotiating with us. He only wants to humiliate me. Your runes have been prepared. Please take some time to rest, the king said, raising a finger as he gave the order and turned to leave. After you return, tell that Demon King this. For me to agree to his terms, he'd have to drain the last drop of blood from the people of Baron Killa. The night fell over the majestic castle, and from inside the room, Sylvia's voice echoed. Sis, I was really worried that you might die. Herver and Sylvia were sitting on the bed. Sylvia gently hugged her sister and whispered after hearing that the surprise attack had completely failed from the kingdom. I went straight to the front lines. Luckily, you're safe and sound now. Herver hugged Sylvia back and gently comforted her. You don't need to worry. Suddenly, Sylvia's expression grew serious and she remembered something. Is the Demon King's army okay? Herver quickly denied it. It's not that. Sylvia stood up, her gaze focused as she observed every gesture and expression from Herver, who was awkwardly trying to explain. I meant that we were defeated, had to retreat, and had very little food. After joining the Demon King's army, they treated me well, trying to convince me to become a diplomatic envoy. Sylvia leaned in close, her expression unreadable as she spoke. I understand now. Sylvia turned her face away, choking back tears. I understand everything now. They must have used every trick to get you to reveal the Alliance's secrets, right? Herver sat there, frozen for a moment, not really understanding what was happening. She let out a soft sigh. Sylvia stretched out her hand in front of her, trembling. It's a kind of torment I can't even describe, she said. She pulled her hand back and looked at Herver, continuing the conversation. The two of them stared at each other, both with helpless expressions like they were dealing with some kind of unclear, ineffective medicine. Herver was sitting on the bed, and Sylvia propped one leg up, staring at him. She even put her hands on her hips, glaring at him. Sylvia spoke seriously. Even the Demon King himself came into the fray, pressuring you with questions on one side, trapping you on the other, and then threw you into this twisted situation. The language of the elves was so vague and hard to understand. Herver frowned, slightly embarrassed by Sylvia's words. He imagined the moment when Mortal poured that strange purple liquid into his mouth. When he thought about it, the images Sylvia described, combined with Flem's harsh hold after the recent sensations, felt like a bizarre dream too tempting to resist. The more he thought about it, the more he regretted it. Tears filled his eyes and he sighed. It was just unfortunate that nothing had ever actually happened. Upon hearing this, Sylvia immediately moved closer and repeated softly, such a pity. Realizing he had misspoken, Herver quickly tried to explain, I meant that nothing has ever happened. Sylvia, with a serious expression, leaned in closer to Herver's face and said, I know you don't want to worry me. She placed both hands on her hips and bent over slightly. But you absolutely mustn't keep lying to yourself. Herver gave a stiff smile, but inside, he really didn't know how to respond. Sylvia placed a hand on his shoulder and Herver looked at her, a bit confused. I need to check, she said. Herver stammered, check, check, check. Before he could react, Sylvia quickly pinned him down. Herver struggled, but the force was overwhelming. Sylvia held Herver's hand tightly with one hand, while using the other to hold her leg to prevent her from resisting. Sylvia's body was positioned between Herver's legs. She spoke softly. As long as there aren't any strange wounds, there's no problem. It'll be over soon. Don't worry, sis. After saying that, Sylvia carefully separated from Herver, focusing on her sister's private area. I won't make you hurt, she whispered. Suddenly, a loud explosion was heard from outside, followed by debris flying everywhere. Sylvia quickly looked up. Behind her, the glass door had shattered, and large flames were visible outside. At the same time, the sound of shouting rang out, the enemy is attacking, the enemy is attacking. Sylvia rushed to the door, peeked outside, and shouted, the enemy is attacking? What's going on? Could it be that the Baron Killa Kingdom's defense is finally collapsing? Herver sat up and followed Sylvia's gaze. Sylvia analyzed the situation seriously. While the front line seemed to still be holding against the demon army, the Baron Killa Kingdom itself has fallen into ruins. It's so bad now, it's hard to look at. The old king probably doesn't even realize that his orders can't even reach past the immediate area around the royal capital anymore. Sylvia's thoughts drifted to the people, starving, barely alive, skin stretched tight over bones, waiting to die in the middle of the forest. Suddenly, Sylvia spoke again. Sis, you must have seen the situation along the way here, right? After a long pause, Sylvia continued, but I have to be honest, there were bones exposed underfoot. It seemed like the scene they had just witnessed was already tragic enough, but even on the streets inside the city, there were dead bodies lying everywhere. Corpses piled up in every direction, and it was even worse than what she had already seen. Realizing something important, Sylvia turned around urgently and said, "The entire city is full of rebels. It's not safe to stay here. I wouldn't be surprised if the rebel forces attack the capital at any time, but it has to happen before we can leave. We need to leave now, sis. The rebels are only targeting the king and the nobles. Let's hurry. Grab my hand, Herver." Sylvia continued, "They won't be a problem for our elf tribe. With our twin powers, we can easily escape the encirclement." Looking at Sylvia's hand, tightly gripping hers, Herver still wasn't ready to make a decision. She pulled her hand away from Sylvia's and refused. "No, I can't leave. What you want, Sylvia, is to escape from here. But what I want is to stay." She stood up firmly and said, "My friends are still in the prison. I can't just leave them behind. I can't ignore them. And if I run now, how will I ever complete my mission as a scout for the Demon King's army?" Sylvia, hearing Herver's words, shouted, "Sis." Then she quickly tried to comfort her. "There will be a solution. Let's go to the prison and release the diplomatic group first." Herver listened to Sylvia and fell silent, deep in thought. The sunset descended upon the prison where the prisoners were held. When Vera saw Herver and Sylvia appear, she was surprised and asked, "Queen Herver and Queen Sylvia, why are you here?" From behind, Ramo and Ibet walked up. Herver looked at them and replied, "It's a long story, and there's no time to explain right now." Ramo asked, "What exactly happened?" Ibet, standing beside him, couldn't hold back her curiosity either. What happened? Ramo turned his attention to Sylvia, his teeth clenched as he thought about Sylvia's greatsword. Why is she here? He remembered how Sylvia and Herver always fought side by side in every battle. Morla had considered one of the twin elven queens as one of the strongest melee fighters in the game, and definitely the most powerful physical force of the elven race. In short, she was just like her sister. As a queen of the elves, if Sylvia were to die or be corrupted, it would turn the elves of Gazma into fallen elves, leading to the Archangel Elf's descent event. Ramo watched Sylvia wielding her greatsword in battle, his gaze still fixed on her. He was visibly uncomfortable. While he had said that she could be captured as a prisoner in the game, not her sister, he couldn't understand why she was here. Damn it, what in the world happened in such a short time? As Ramo was lost in thought, a voice suddenly called out, "Hey, you cat-eared guy." Sylvia pointed at Ramo and said, You look so flustered. What are you thinking?" Ramo, startled by the sudden shout, stammered, "Ha, me?" Looking at Ramo, Sylvia put her hand on her hip and scoffed, revealing her demonic nature. She smirked and loudly guessed, while Herver, standing behind her, looked on in horror. "I'm sure you're thinking about getting all close and personal with her first, right? Trying to, get cozy with her? Not gonna happen." Ramo was left stunned. What? Herver just finished hearing it and immediately gave Sylvia a good scolding. He had already told her to be careful with her words. And seriously, with everything going on right now, why bring that up? Ramo helplessly turned away and looked in another direction. From a certain angle, it was clear that these two really were sisters. Ramo's older and second older brothers walked up in front of everyone. The older brother spoke up, "Lord Sotit, we're ready." What exactly happened? Herver explained the plan to everyone. The mission to the Emmy camp failed. Now we need to break through the siege and leave Baron Killa. If we don't, once the rebels break through the royal city, we'll be in real danger. Ibet bit her hand, thinking to herself, the mission failed, and now we can't expose any more of the Demon King's army's secrets. Damn it, why does this have to happen right now? Outside, a huge explosion went off again with flames spreading everywhere. The prison shook violently as a result. Sylvia grabbed her sword, looked at Herver, and urgently said, "There's no time left, sister. Let's go." Footsteps raced forward, and at the same time, everyone shouted, "Kill!" Smoke and flames filled the sky. The people, each holding a sword, stood ready to face the soldiers. One soldier, seeing what was happening, spoke up, "These people are all citizens of our country." The two soldiers looked at the crowd, and they really couldn't bring themselves to strike. One said, "Who are we really fighting here?" As soon as the words were out, both soldiers dropped their swords. They raised their hands in surrender. The door behind them opened, and one soldier shouted, "No more fighting, no more fighting. There's no reason to continue this battle." Someone nearby agreed, "Don't fight anymore, we surrender." One of them, holding a sword pointed toward the city wall surrounded by smoke and flames, shouted, "Hold your ground. Don't let them get any closer to the king." All around the kingdom, there was nothing but smoke. The evening had fallen over the place known as the Royal Palace. The king stood there, gazing out, his fist clenched as he watched the scene unfolding below the city walls. He was filled with anger. Traitors, all of them. Not one will be spared. Capture them all and execute them for me. Someone approached behind the king, urging him to reconsider. "Your Majesty," even at this point, as soon as the king heard the voice, he turned around. It was Baron Killa, the royal guard, followed by two soldiers. He looked at the king and asked, "Do you still think those people, just trying to survive, deserve your mercy?" The presence of the guard made the king even angrier. Why aren't you out there leading the troops to suppress the traitors? What are you doing in my chambers? And what did you mean by that? The guard, calmly meeting the king's gaze, replied, I'm asking you, your majesty, who is it that has led this country to the brink of disaster? At the guard's question, the king slammed his hand down, now truly enraged. His face twisted with fury as he shouted, How dare you? Are you mad? Arrest him. The order was given, but no soldier dared move to apprehend the guard. What's the matter, your majesty? The guard sighed. Did you not hear what I said? He continued, his voice steady. Your majesty, do you still believe that this throne gives you the power to command as you wish? Open your eyes. The guard added, When I heard you were preparing to meet with the Demon King's military delegation, I thought maybe there was still a chance to turn things around, but I never imagined. Upon hearing the guard's words, the king's eyes widened as if he had just realized something. He pointed at the guard and asked, Could it be that you were working with the rebel army to create this chaos? If not, how could they have attacked the capital so quickly? At this point, the guard, already gripping his sword, calmly responded, Not only that, but I was also the one who secretly influenced people inside and outside the capital, leading to its siege. And if it were for you turning Baron Killa's territory into a hell on earth, how could we have made all of this happen so easily? The king was about to speak, but was suddenly interrupted by a fit of coughing. You! Cough, 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 cough. The guard paid little attention, drawing his sword with a mocking tone. How pathetic. It seems the years have worn down your body, but haven't given you any wisdom or clarity. Pointing the sword directly at the king, the guard ordered the soldiers, Arrest him. Holding a handkerchief, the old man spoke slowly. I understand now. Facing the soldiers who were raising their weapons at him, he spoke again. I understand everything now. The king's face darkened. The Demon King's army had sent an emissary. The timing of the rebels' attack on the city. None of this was a coincidence. You all saw the Demon King's army as your last straw. At this point, the old man's face twisted with rage and he shouted, Then let me show you. He was suddenly engulfed in flames, causing the soldiers to retreat a few steps in fear. I will let you all witness it. One soldier, overcome with fear, collapsed to the ground in front of the king. Everything around him, including the soldier, was consumed by the red flames, and the last hope of salvation was reduced to ashes.